Welcome to the With Winning in Mind podcast. We had the wonderful opportunity to interview Jim Poteet. He is absolutely fascinating. He's a world champion free throw shooter, part of the NAIA Hall of Fame, a basketball coach, and what we talked about the most was his philosophy on free throw shooting. Every shot should go in, and he's going to explain to us why. We also on our Patreon channel, if you're a Patreon member, join us because we talk to him about how do you get kids to learn how to shoot free throws consistently, how does he work with his college players, and so much more. Enjoy. Well, I actually want to know more about who you are. Like, how did you get started in basketball? Kind of like the backstory.
Well, I grew up out in West Texas. Actually, I was born in Odessa, moved to Midland when I was 10, and always loved sports, and had a sixth grade basketball coach that said, hey, you've got some talent in this game. Maybe that's your future. I'd played baseball as a young kid, and that was really my number one sport at the time, but got interested in basketball and played in high school at those days at the top level in Texas. It was 4A. I guess it's 6A now, and had good success in high school. Went to college and played basketball at the small college level out in California at Pasadena College.
And then you started coaching shortly after that, or did it take a while?
I actually, after I finished my BA degree, I went to Cal State LA and finished a master's degree. And that's when I got interested in basketball shooting. I had to do a master's thesis. So I decided to do a thesis on the bank shot, banking it off the backboard into the basket, because I found that was an easier way to score, because you're shooting at a different kind of target. If you shoot at the backboard, you're shooting at a vertical target instead of a horizontal target. And you could pick a spot on the backboard to hit and the ball go in the basket. So I did my master's thesis on bank shooting. And that was a lot of fun doing that, and had a little reaction to it. Of course, that was before the internet, so people didn't find your thesis easy back in those days.
Tim Duncan must have found it, because he was the master of the bank shot.
He was a great bank shooter. And again, I don't understand why players don't use the bank shot more, especially when they're around the basket in close, and you can take it up off of that spot and right into the basket. It to me is an easier shot. And then years later, when I began to work on my doctorate, I thought, well, why don't I take this shooting idea a bit farther? And I started talking to my advisor at Oklahoma State University, and he said, well, what about free throws? And so we started thinking about that. And one night I was watching the David Letterman show, and David was back in the days when it was 90 minutes long. And he said, tonight we're going to have the world's greatest free throw shooter on. Well, immediately they had my attention, and I thought, well, it'll probably be a 25-year-old guy up shooting. And when they introduced, they said, this is Dr. Tom Amberry, the world's greatest free throw shooter. And it was a 77-year-old man who walks out, kind of shuffles out. And they really got my attention when they said he hit 2,750 free throws in a row.
Oh, my.
And I thought, wow. And so then David said, well, we're going to take him outside the studio, set him up on a portable basket, and he's going to shoot free throws all during the David Letterman show, and we'll check back in with him periodically, and then we'll see how many he hit in a row at the end of the show. So Dr. Amberry started shooting, and at the end of the show, he had hit 133 out of 134 free throws outside in New York City in the wintertime. It was cold out there, and I thought, this guy's pretty good. So that's where I really developed my interest. And a few days later, I was in the bookstore. I don't remember, I think it's a Barnes and Noble. And I saw a little book called Free Throw. And I pulled it out, and here was Tom Amberry's name. I read the forward to the book, and it talked about he lived in Long Beach, California. So I thought, hey, this is prior to the cell phone. It was back, or the cell phone being very popular. It's back in the early 90s. So I thought, well, I'll call information. You don't do that anymore, but called information, got his phone number in Long Beach, and he answered the phone. And I said, "Is this Dr. Tom Amberry?" He said, "It is." And I said, "The world's greatest free throw shooter?" I said, "I saw you on the David Letterman show a couple of days ago." He said, "Well, who am I talking to?" And I said my name, and he said, "I know you." And I thought, "You know me?" He said, "Yeah, I used to watch you coach in your first coaching job at Biola University here in Southern California. I had a friend who went to school there," and he said, "I've seen you coach several times." Well, that set us up to be friends, and I ended up flying out and spending time with him. And I decided, well, if I'm going to write about free throw shooting, I'm going to become a good free throw shooter. And one of the things that happens today in Senior Olympics was started for people over 50 years ago in the U.S., and they usually have free throw contests at those. So I said, I'm going to start going to those contests. So here I was a little bit younger than Dr. Amberry, and I started going to contests, and I'm now, I don't compete anymore, but I've won something over 300 gold medals shooting free throws at contests where you shoot 25 in a row. And so it's been an interesting thing for me. And after I talked to Dr. Amberry, I went back to my advisor and I said, "I want to do my dissertation on free throw shooting." He said, "That's great." And he actually came up with the name of my dissertation. He said, "You know, it looks so easy when you watch it." And he said, "But yet it's so hard." So he said, "The paradox of the free throw. The things that make it look so easy are the things that make it so hard." And I began to think about being an actor on stage. Really, when you get fouled and you step to the free throw line, think about an NBA player in front of a crowd of 18,000 people. He's the only actor on the stage at that moment. Nobody else is an actor. Everybody else is standing around. They hand him the ball, and he has to perform his lines, which happens to be shooting a basketball at that moment. And there is a great deal of pressure. Mm-hmm. There's no doubt about that.
That's a good analogy.
I like that a lot because all eyes are on you. Everyone is watching you. You're literally on stage.
And guess what happens? I began to also think as I was trying to build my case for this, I got to thinking about what does a player think about when he's on the stage just before he shoots. They hand you the ball. You've got 10 seconds to shoot the ball. And I began to interview people, and I found out there were three things that people said about free throw shooting. And number one, what happened in their mind was, I have to make this free throw.
Ooh.
Well, if you think like that, that just compounds the pressure. Just compounds it. I have to make it.
Just add a few more bricks on the shoulders.
Yeah.
Or the second thing they say is, I hope I don't miss.
Just
the negative thought that goes through your head.
Mm-hmm.
And then the last thing I asked people, and they said was, well, I don't think about anything. Well, guess what? Your mind is active all the time. And if you decide you're not going to think about anything, something that's strange to the whole environment will flip through your head. A basketball player, high school basketball player might say, "Whoo, I forgot to do my homework. Oh, and now I'm going to shoot the ball." So all three of those things were absolutely the wrong thing to do when you're stepping to the free throw line.
Yeah, but it's so common in those type of sports where it's a proactive element. You got a few seconds to do it, but a few seconds to the conscious mind is plenty of time to get in the way, you know.
So then we began to take it through the next stages, and I talked to Dr. Amberry a lot because to make 2,750 free throws in a row, it took him about 18 months of practice. And because he was a foot surgeon, podiatrist, he thought from a scientific viewpoint all the time. So he talked to a lot of people in engineering, people in mechanics and stuff. Well, what do you need to do as you're shooting a free throw? And so he was very convinced that you had to come up with a routine to do it. And again, I think if, as you guys watch basketball, you're going to see guys, especially right now with the pros playing in the playoffs, you're going to see guys step to the line and they have no idea what they're doing. They have no routine. Charles Barkley was the master at all this. He was a great player back in his day, and I love to listen to him on TNT. He's one of the funniest guys ever. But every time he'd step to the free throw line, he had a different routine. It was almost never the same. And so you start coming up with some kind of routine. And Dr. Amberry had one that was very simple. He said, feet square to the line. You got to be behind the free throw line. Bounce the ball 3 times, not dribble it, but bounce it. Just very easy, bounce it. Thumb in the channel. A basketball has, I wish I had a basketball here with me, but has a channel in it. It's made of panels. And so you get your thumb in that channel and then get your elbow in and shoot and release the ball. And we talked about whether you look at the rim. I see basketball players staring at the rim. And we began to find out some physiological things that happen. There's a thing called gaze haze. If I stare at something too long, it loses its focus and sharpness. Yeah, you just try it sometimes. So you don't want to be staring at the basket. And so what Dr. Amberry and I did is we never looked at the rim until we are ready to shoot the ball. And the moment you first look at the rim is when that focus is going to be the sharpest. And that began to make some sense to us. And so gaze haze became a part of it. And the other thing we didn't want to do is spin the ball in our hands, because the sharpest touch receptors that you have in your hand are the ones in your finger points or fingerprints. As you know, when blind people learn to read, they use and that's very strong. So if you spin the ball in your hand, guess what that does? That deadens your touch for just a second, and you need great touch to shoot the ball. And as I go back to the question I heard you guys talk about a few weeks ago on your podcast, you were talking about, well, should I slap hands with a guy after he misses a free throw? And man, you guys, that really sounded with me, because I don't understand why I'm going to praise someone, give them a high five because they failed. I want to praise someone because they succeed.
Absolutely.
A guy doesn't need to be slapping hands after he misses or she misses. They need to be thinking about the next shot and getting ready for it so it's successful.
Yeah, not being distracted by their teammates on a false praise.
False praise. So that's what intrigued me so much when I heard you guys that day, and you guys were trying to think of my name and who I was, and the fact that I'd been to see you one day in your offices. And I said, well, I need to get a hold of it. I happened to have Brian's cell number, so I contacted him, and he said, well, I'm going to give my brother a real bad time.
He sure did.
He did too.
He called me up and he goes, I got two words for you. I go, what's that? He goes, Jim Poteet. And he goes, do you know who that is? And I'm like, I think I should know who that is. And he gave me a brutal hard time that morning. Made me feel so bad. I want to go back. You mentioned the gaze haze. So this is an interesting point to me, because for years, your dad teaches what he calls mental program in shooting. And we teach it in basically all sports that are proactive elements of it. And there was a part of his program, the mental program, the last part of it is where you set the eyes on a specific thing. And years later, he always felt like there needs to be a transition from thinking to just doing, right? So how can we move the conscious off to the side? And so this whole, what he called point of focus, was critical to doing that. And years later, he comes across an article from Joan Vickers called The Quiet Eye Phenomenon. Have you ever read that? Are you familiar
have
with that?
not.
Well,
I'm sorry, I don't know about that.
What you were talking about with you have a period of time that you can focus on something before it gets kind of hazy and you get distracted, you move on. She actually did a study with baseball pitchers and golfers and found that your optimal focus to look at something is 1 to 3 seconds. If you don't give yourself a second to look at it, then you can't focus on it, right? Because it takes the eye and the brain, a half a second to a second to kind of, oh, that's where I'm going to go, right? But if you wait longer than 3 seconds, then you start thinking about other things. So it's interesting that you make that connection in that moment as far as there's a time, and it sounds to me it's more like 1 to 2 seconds in basketball. Would you agree with that? I think that's kind of fits right on what you're talking about.
Well, we begin to think about a camera, and I don't know how a camera works, but I know that when you open the lens to let the light in to take the picture, that if you leave it open too long, back in the old days of the kind of cameras we used to use, your picture would be completely out of focus because it had gotten too much light into it. And I think that same thing probably applies to the eye. I want to see that basket. And then as soon as I see it, folks, then I want to shoot that ball. And I probably should go back a little bit and say, I decided I wanted to become a good free throw shooter. And I was a good free throw shooter. In college, I shot 75%. That was way above average. And so, but I decided, Dr. Amberry, I want to get as good as you were. Now, I'm probably not going to shoot 2,750 in a row, but I began to focus on the idea of making 100 in a row. And so I started working at it. Within about 2 months, I hit 100 in a row. And usually when I would go to shoot, I could hit 98, 99 out of 100 every time I played. So I'd become pretty good. So one night I said, I'm going to see how many I can shoot. And I didn't have anybody to rebound that night. So as I shot the ball, if you shoot it perfectly, the ball will go through the basket. It'll have a little backspin on it. It'll come back to you, but you're not going to shoot the perfect one every time. But that night I made 489 in a row, and I had to break concentration every time to make sure I got the ball back, because sometimes it didn't come straight back to me. So I had to go walk, get it, walk back to the line. And I hit 489 in a row. And somebody said, why didn't you hit 500? Well, I don't know. I got bored, really, what happened. Because think about shooting a free throw. It becomes boring after a while because it's the same thing over and over and over again. But let me tell you, I doubt that there's anybody watching that will watch this podcast that has hit 489 free throws in a row.
Yeah.
Oh, for sure. For sure. So do you think that this is something that high school, college coaches should be spending so much more time with their players working on, and are they ignoring it? Are they giving the time necessary?
Well, let me tell you what I think happens. I think, first of all, coaches tend to be a little bit arrogant. They think they know everything about the game. And free throw shooting looks simple. And what happens at practice is it's what I call throwaway time. Oh, guys, go shoot 10 free throws and come back and tell me how many you make. Well, the kids don't take it serious. They probably don't know how many they make out of 10. They'll go and come back. Oh, coach, I hit 8. Oh, that's great. So there's not any real intent and real purpose to free throw practice. That's one thing. Number two, they don't realize how important free throws are. I did some study on that, and about 25% of all points scored in a high school and college basketball game are scored at the free throw line. 25% of the points. So should you spend maybe 25% of your offensive practice time on free throws?
Absolutely.
Okay? So that makes some sense. The other thing is, as the game gets late and the score is close, guess what? That percentage becomes higher. In the last 5 minutes of the game, approximately 50% of all points scored are free throws. the last 2 minutes of the game, approximately 66% of all points scored are free throws. And in the last minute of the game, over 75% of all the points scored are free throws. And guess what? The most pressure is on those last few minutes if the game is close.
So it makes sense that they would look at free throws being more important, and secondly, that the mental game and handling the pressure would be more important.
No doubt.
But you're saying they almost ignore it.
They ignore it. And I think sports psychology is becoming more and more and more important. The things we've learned about the brain over the last 15 years or so are so important. And of course, your dad being an Olympic gold medalist and begin to think about all this. And, I really admire him and the things I read and what you guys are doing. I think you're on the cutting edge of what should be happening in coaching. There's no reason that guys that want to become free throw shooters aren't contacting me, coaches aren't contacting me and say, what can you teach me about free throw shooting? Mm-hmm. I know more about it than most anybody that's coaching.
Yeah.
How can people get a hold of you? Let's say someone's watching and they want to contact you. How can they find you?
Well, my email address, I use poteetjim at yahoo.com. They could get a hold of you guys, and you guys have my phone numbers, and they can get a hold of me. But it's amazing to me. I hear from sports writers fairly consistently wanting to know about it. But you know what? I get very few calls from coaches saying, hey, you're an expert in free throw shooting. Teach me all you know. And
I love this idea. I would love to know if anybody watches this podcast, reaches out to you, who's a coach, because I think there might be some. I'm hopeful. We'll see.
Well, if you remember when I came to your office and talked with your dad and you guys, and I said to you, I think there could be a thing you do with your company where free throw shooting could be a part of it. You do it in all these other areas, shooting. I think that it looks so easy that people forget how hard it really is, and it's a mental game.
Absolutely.
It's once you get the physical aspects of it, developing a routine, that's not that hard. That's really fairly easy. But the practice of it and learning to control the mental aspects of it is what will really make you a great free throw shooter.
Yeah, I think most of the players don't have a defined routine, meaning they don't have a defined physical way of doing it and a defined mental thought process while they're physically doing it. But if you go back to some of the greats, if you go watch like Steve Nash and you go watch John Stockton, Karl Malone, those three individuals are three that I've watched over growing up. They all had the same routine. But I don't think most people define what we find in especially like golf is people will say routine, but they don't have any clue from a mental routine. They're all talking what they're physically doing. They're not tying into what they're thinking about with what they're physically doing. And then because of that, there's no way to master it because it's not defined. And if you can't master something, then you can't duplicate what you're doing in practice under stress in a competition. And if you can't do that, there's no way you can be consistent from one game to the next to the next. So to me, you would think that people would say, okay, what do I need to do to improve on this? So how much of it, in your opinion, is technical versus mental when you get to this, Final Four tournament to the NBA, that level of play? How much of it is physical versus mental, in your opinion?
Well, I think the mental is by far the most important part of it. The physical should have been mastered a long time ago. That should be the easy part. But again, I just think nobody takes it serious from the coaching standpoint. I'd like to sit through some pro practices. I bet they don't take it very serious either. That'd be my guess. And again, we're going to watch NBA, and there's some great shooters. One of the other great shooters you didn't mention a while ago was Mark Price. Mark Price actually, I think, holds the record I think he shot 92%.
He played for Cleveland, didn't he?
Yeah, he played for Cleveland. He played at Georgia Tech in college.
Him and
a great
Darty
free
played
throw
together.
shooter, and he's an Oklahoma boy.
Yeah,
That's where he grew up. And
well, you can't expect me to remember his name. I didn't remember your name.
I know. Well, you have short-term memory loss. Anyway, I just think the mental aspect of it is so important, and it just takes a few little things to think about, but it takes practice also. You have to practice the mental aspects, and that's where I think coaching should be going in today's world in all sports. Baseball, I think, has done a really good job of working with players on learning how to take pitches. You know, there's many more walks today than there used to be because the players don't swing at very many bad pitches. And they've done a good job with the mental aspects. I'm afraid basketball has done a very, very poor job with the mental aspects. We depend on athleticism. Oh, he's athletic. He's got great jumps, great hops. We think that's the key to the game, and it's very important. But the mental aspect is huge, especially in shooting the basketball.
Yeah, you're also talking about going from a reactive environment to a proactive environment. And that athleticism really pays dividends in the reactive, environment. But when you go to a proactive environment, that athleticism goes away. Because like you said, you are the only actor that's got to read your line. And it ain't like that line. I mean, how much coordination you need a little coordination to hit a free throw, but it's not like the coordination of, a jump shot or, a hook shot or something like that. It's pretty basic.
Okay, so I know very little about basketball, but this is what I believe to be true, and you'll tell me if I'm right. When you're in that reactive element, you're trusting your subconscious skill. You're really in your subconscious. You're responding to what's going on around you quickly. And then they hand you the ball, and it's all eyes on you, and now all of a sudden your thoughts jump in, and you don't trust your subconscious in that moment. And if you don't have a pre-planned way to think, you can't even tap into it. Right?
Yeah, that's where you start thinking about those three things that kept coming up. I hope I don't miss. I hope I make it. Mm-hmm. Or I need to make this, or I don't want to upset my teammates or disappoint anyone. I bet there's a few people that are got the ball in their hand about to make a free throw and thinking about pizza.
Probably.
Some
what
weird.
Are we going to eat tonight? Where are we going to eat after the game?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Or I've got a date tonight,
They hear a noise, like, who's that? And, anything can pop in your head at that point. And if you don't have a way to occupy your mind that transfers power to the subconscious to let yourself execute that free throw, it's going to be hard for you to be consistent in it. So why is it do you think some people just don't ever get the technical thing down? Because, you see some guys that are NBA level that are Hall of Famers, but they didn't have a good stat when it comes to free throws.
Yeah, well, and again, probably nobody ever spent the time saying, hey, this is really important. And you could, with what we know about statistics now, you could take a player, think about Wilt Chamberlain, who in my mind is the greatest basketball player ever. And you guys are too young to probably remember Wilt, 7'1", had all the scoring records, averaged 50 points a game for one season in the NBA, scored 100 points in one game, but he was about a 48% free throw shooter, terrible free throw shooter. The night he scored 100 points, though, he was 28 for 32 at the free throw line. For some reason, the free throws went in that night. But you think about somebody like him, if you could have shown him, hey, well, this is really important. Instead of averaging 50 points a game, you would have probably averaged close to 60 points a game if you could hit free throws on a consistent basis. And you just think of one instance. I worked a little bit with a player with the Thunders, or I was trying to work with him, let's say, and they signed him to a contract, $5 million over 4 years. Well, that's pretty good pay. I'd be happy to sign that contract. But he was a 40% free throw shooter. And that next year, when they put him in the games, they were still doing the intentional foul at the end of a ball game. So every time this player would touch the ball, they'd foul him. Well, they couldn't play. The Thunder couldn't play him the last 5 minutes of a game. And so here's your guy that they're paying a lot of money to sitting on the bench because you couldn't put him in the game because they'd foul him intentionally and he couldn't make a free throw. It's just silly. And the sports writer in Oklahoma City wrote an article trying to get the Thunder to react to it and said, well, they need to go down the street and contact Jim Poteet. He could probably help this player get a little bit better. Surely I could take him from 40% to 50%, 60% maybe. What if I improved him just 10%? That'd mean he'd make maybe one more free throw a game. Would that win a ball game? Sometimes it would.
Yeah. Some people here might be looking at it saying, okay, but the people we've mentioned that were really good and the ones that we mentioned that statistically aren't that good, like Will Chamberlain is 7'1", Shaquille O'Neal 7'1". Is there something correlated to the physical aspects of, taller athlete kind of thing? I don't think so, because you look, David Robinson was a pretty good free throw shooter and he's 7-footer. Akeem Olajuwon was 7-footer. Yeah.
Right there in Dallas was a great free throw shooter.
Yeah. So you think from that perspective, it's not the physical part. Obviously, if you can do what they can do, they can learn how to do free throw, but they're probably just not taking it serious.
I'd say it's a matter of concentration. It's discipline. We haven't mentioned that word yet. To do something that's kind of boring takes real discipline. And I would think, your dad, you guys and your shooting that you guys do, that's kind of boring. You do it over and over and over and over again.
Yeah.
I also feel like if you're told over and over and over again that you're a bad free throw shooter and you don't have a really high average, you're getting a lot of negative imprints, your self-image is not growing. And so there's that element too, that if they understood how self-image works and they had a real routine like we teach, they would not only grow in their skill, they'd grow in their confidence while they're controlling their thoughts, and then they can become unstoppable.
Well, there's no doubt you could improve. That's true. I think coaches sometimes, when guys step to the free throw line, do bad things. Kids step into the free throw line to shoot 2 free throws, and the coach is up saying, now, relax, trying to give him instruction at a time when he ought to be working on what's going on inside of his brain instead of listening to a coach over here.
He tells them don't miss when they come out, when they have to time out and he's got to go make the free throw. They just don't miss. I'm sure that happens a few times.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. And coaches give negative imprints into the brain. And of course, thinking negative is a terrible thing for you when you're trying to do something. Mm-hmm. And goes back then again to your whole idea. How am I going to slap your high five after you've missed a free throw? No, I'm not going to. I'm going to say, Troy, get up there and concentrate. It's what I'm going to be thinking. I don't need to be slapping your hand.
Yeah. No, that's pretty interesting though. And the whole self-image thing. If they don't take what Jim's saying as far as the free throw, 25% of the points in a game in general are from that, and they're not paying 25% of their time on offensive training for that, then they're not going to do any with the self-image.
Well, right. It's not going to grow at all.
Yeah, but this is what really kind of separates what our dad did in the middle game than what we see with a lot of of our other people that are studying the middle game, is that the self-image is the one thing he thought that was missing. Everyone knows the conscious mind is focusing in the subconscious skill level, but everyone else is tying the self-image with the thoughts. And he was like, well, if that's true, then why am I not performing well when I do control my thoughts? There's got to be a reason why I go into competition and I'm doubting my ability when I know I'm good, and it's because you really don't believe you're as good as you were. So where does that come in? And we believe you can build confidence. There's a group of people out there that strongly believe you either got confidence or you don't. And I think some coaches fall into that camp, and that might be where the arrogant individuals you're talking about are coming from. They're like, look, you got it or you don't. You can't just teach it. And I'm like, no, you can teach and build confidence, but you have to know how to do it.
Well, and the coach is integral in that. Like, the coach has a lot of influence over the size of the self-image of the player. And I wish they understood that more, and maybe listening to this would be helpful to some coaches.
One real interesting NBA example goes way back when Shaq was either a rookie or his second year. He was with the Orlando Magic, and they had a really good team. And that's also the time that Michael Jordan had retired the first time. And Houston and Orlando were playing for the NBA championship. And that's when Houston won it 2 years in a row with Hakeem Olajuwon. Well, late in one of the games, early games of the best of 7 series, a guy named Nick Anderson came to the free throw line for Orlando. The game was close. It may have been tied at the time, or Orlando may have been 1 point down. I don't remember that exactly. But Nick Anderson was about an 88% free throw shooter. But he stepped to the line. He's the only actor in there. He makes those 2 free throws. Orlando's going to win the game and probably would go on to win the series. But he missed 2 free throws as bad as you ever could. Well, that goes back to confidence. I'm sure at that time, Nick was a young guy. He had been a really good free throw shooter. But, that ruined his confidence and his self-image so bad that he never was an 88% free throw shooter again. The next year he was shooting like 65%. Wow. It really destroyed and it had to be self-image and confidence at that time. And that was a very bad thing for Nick Anderson. And it probably cost the Orlando Magic winning a world championship. One incident.
Yeah, I remember that back in the day. You probably didn't watch that. Yeah, I remember that. It was an integral part in his career for sure, and how that works in that. So, as far as their percentage, what do you think the average should be for an NBA player? Like, what do you think? Okay, this is a percentage that should be acceptable in your opinion. Is it as high as 80-90%, or do you think maybe not? What's your opinion on what really should it be?
Well, first of all, it's their profession. They work at it. That's what they're doing for a living. So, goodness, I would think in the NBA, if I were a coach there, I would want my guys to hit probably about 85%. And I would want some of my players to be above 90%. I think there's going to be a range in there. But my goodness, why not 85%? That's allowing 15% failure. And why couldn't an NBA player have somebody work with it? There's only 12 on the team, 12 guys. Why couldn't each player spend an hour shooting free throws every day? And I'll bet you they don't spend more than 10 minutes.
It'd be interesting to find out what the average amount of time a professional basketball player spends on free throws.
It wouldn't be very much, I can tell you.
So do we know, there's probably a stat somewhere, do we know the stats between Division I men, Division I women versus NBA, WNBA? Do we know those stats? And I mean, are they about the same, or are they scattered?
No, that'd be a little higher. The NBA would be a little higher than college. The WNBA would probably be a little higher than college. I don't have those stats. Back when I did my dissertation, though, you'd be amazed. At that time, in men's basketball, at the NCAA Division I level, they were shooting about 66% at the free throw line overall. Stats for all Division I. Women was about 69%. So they were about 2 or 3 percentage points higher. And I can't tell you why, particularly there. Women's hands are smaller, but they also have a smaller ball. The ball's just a little bit smaller. But 66%, that's terrible. Again, at the Division I level, they ought to be shooting 75% overall easily. And you think if you improved by 7 or 8 percentage points, well, would that make the difference between a few wins? I did a couple of studies on a couple of high school teams that I was close to. And one team went 4-15 one year, 19 games. It was an Oklahoma high school team, 4-15. I looked and they lost 7 games by 3 points or less. Okay. I can bet you that those could have been won. And had they won, let's say 4 of those games, okay, 4, that takes you to 8, cuts down the 15 losses. Now your record is 8-11. If you won all those games, all of a sudden you'd have a winning record.
Wow.
So success at the free throw line, I think, is a big difference for you. And in the NBA, it's money.
So basically, NBA contracts ought to be based on percentage of free throws.
Well,
here's your base pay. If you don't exceed this in free throws, then we pay you less. If you exceed it, then you get your pay.
That'd be an interesting thing. I imagine it'd be hard to get the agent to agree to that contract.
Well, you sit there and say, here's a contract. We'll guarantee this. If he shoots 80%, he does it. If it's less than 80%, then every 5 percentage points below that, we deduct that amount on his contract. But you know what? If he does 85%, we'll give him a 5% bonus. If he does, 90%, we get 10% bonus on that. That might be different. That would be very interesting to see. I bet you they would start training more free throws if that was in their contract.
Probably so.
That would be interesting. So do you think we're coming around the corner here and people are starting to take it more serious in certain areas, or do you think we're still stuck in that the paradox is just not right?
I think we're stuck. I think coaches are going to have to change their attitude. Mm-hmm. That's my thought at this time, although, I'm not as close to the situation now.
Who do you think's the best coach in college ever, and who do you think the best coach in pro ever is?
Well, there's not much doubt who it is in college. John Wooden.
Yep.
You win 10 national championships in 12 years is unbelievable. And I was very fortunate to be in California during much of that and got pretty well acquainted with Coach Wooden. In fact, his number one assistant, Gary Cunningham, and I played ball together in the AAU league out there. So I had time with him, and Wooden was no doubt the greatest coach.
What about the NBA?
Well, Phil Jackson is a great coach. And one of the things I really admired about Phil Jackson is how he used the mental aspects in coaching. He was a different breed of cat as far as a coach is concerned. He was bringing books to his players all the time. He was approaching them from all kinds of different ways. I think he was very, 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 very good coach. And of course, he had great success at different places. I think when you only have success at one place, maybe that's a little bit different. But
all right, so I'm going to close this out. I want to just thank you so much for taking the time to talk to us today. And I'm going to put your contact, your email address in the notes. So if people want to get a hold of you, if those college coaches want to find you, they can. And we're going to spend a little bit of time talking about more in detail on what to think about at free throws for our Patreon members. So if you're not already a Patreon member, please go ahead and join us as a silver or gold level member if you want to know more about what we have to say about hitting those free throws. Like this podcast, go ahead and subscribe to our channel, and we look forward to seeing you next time.